12,000 U.S. Marines. One amphibious assault against heavily fortified enemy coastline, defended by integrated network of bunkers, artillery, anti-ship missiles, and mines. Largest American beach assault operation since World War II, attempted against defenses specifically designed to make amphibious landings impossible through concentrated firepower and obstacles that doctrine says modern defenders can employ to defeat any attacking force, regardless of size. Military analysts worldwide predicted assault would result in catastrophic casualties, reminiscent of bloodiest amphibious operations in history when defenders had prepared positions and attackers had to cross killing zones without cover. What actually happened during first 6 hours of assault didn't just defy casualty predictions. It demonstrated that fundamental assumptions about amphibious warfare and defensive superiority require complete revision. When attackers employ methods defenders didn't anticipate and cannot effectively counter. But the reason why 12,000 Marines successfully assaulted fortified coast with casualties far below predictions has nothing to do with overwhelming firepower or technological superiority. It was one deception operation conducted weeks before assault that convinced defenders Americans would land at completely different location, creating defensive preparations that were optimized for wrong beach. And understanding that deception operation requires waiting for revelation that transforms everything about amphibious warfare and operational security in modern conflict. Just weeks ago, Strategic Command authorized amphibious assault to establish foothold on enemy-held territory, enabling follow-on operations. Target coastline was heavily defended. Enemy had spent months fortifying beaches with obstacles, mines, bunkers, and artillery positioned specifically to defeat amphibious assault. Intelligence indicated defensive preparations were comprehensive and professional. Every likely landing beach had been identified and fortified. Fire plans were developed, rehearsals conducted. Enemy commanders were confident their defenses could inflict prohibitive casualties on any amphibious force attempting assault. American planners faced problem that amphibious doctrine struggles with: how to assault defended beach when defenders have adequate warning to prepare comprehensive defenses. Historical amphibious assaults succeeded through surprise, overwhelming firepower, or accepting massive casualties. Modern defensive capabilities make surprise difficult, overwhelming firepower expensive, and massive casualties politically unacceptable. American solution was deception operation, making enemy prepare defenses at wrong locations. Welcome to AndreyNavyReport, where military analysis meets operational reality. Week -6, deception operation began. Not simple feint or demonstration, but comprehensive information operation designed to convince enemy that American amphibious assault would target specific beaches that were actually diversionary objectives rather than main landing. Deception wasn't just about creating false signals intelligence. It required building complete operational picture that enemy intelligence would detect through multiple collection methods, all pointing to same conclusion about where Americans planned to land. That comprehensive approach required coordination across multiple American units, creating realistic activity patterns that enemy reconnaissance would interpret as assault preparation for diversionary beaches, while actual assault force prepared operations against different target beaches. Enemy would leave less heavily defended because their intelligence indicated Americans weren't interested in those areas. Week -4. Deception operations included amphibious rehearsals near diversionary beaches that enemy surveillance could observe, signals intelligence emissions suggesting command post locations oriented toward diversionary objectives, logistics preparations visible through reconnaissance indicating supply buildup, supporting operations at wrong locations, and deliberate security leaks through controlled sources providing enemy intelligence with consistent information about American plans targeting diversionary beaches. Simultaneously, actual assault preparations occurred under strict operational security, with emissions control, movement restrictions, and counterintelligence operations, preventing enemy from detecting real preparation. That parallel operation, obvious preparation for diversionary assault plus concealed preparation for actual assault, created intelligence picture where enemies saw clear evidence. Americans planned to land at specific beaches while remaining blind to actual landing preparations at different locations. Week -2. Enemy intelligence had concluded American amphibious assault would target diversionary beaches. That assessment was based on comprehensive intelligence from multiple sources, all indicating same conclusion. Enemy commanders allocated defensive resources accordingly, strengthening fortifications at diversionary beaches, positioning artillery for optimal coverage of those areas, concentrating reserves for rapid reinforcement of diversionary sectors, and preparing fire plans optimized for defensive operations at locations American deception suggested were assault objectives. Meanwhile, beaches where Americans actually planned landing remained defended but received less priority in defensive preparations because enemy intelligence indicated Americans had no interest in those sectors. That asymmetric resource allocation created exactly the conditions American planners needed: heavily defended diversionary beaches that wouldn't be assaulted, plus lightly defended actual beaches that would be primary landing zones. Week -1. Final assault preparations included rehearsals and briefings for actual operation. Marines conducting assault didn't know about comprehensive deception operation. Operational security meant most personnel believed publicly discussed plans were actual plans to prevent inadvertent compromise through communications or behavior that enemy might detect. Only senior commanders knew real landing beaches differed from publicly planned objectives. That compartmentation ensured deception remained effective, even as thousands of Marines prepared for assault, with most believing they would land at locations that were actually diversionary objectives. American forces would redirect to actual landing beaches during transit in communications blackout, preventing enemy from detecting change in plans. That late redirect was risky, required complex navigation and coordination with reduced communications, but necessary to maintain deception until assault was irreversible. Hour 0. Amphibious Task Force departed for assault operations. Initial course aligned with diversionary beaches, maintaining deception as long as possible. Enemy surveillance detected American departure and alerted defensive forces at diversionary beaches to prepare for imminent assault. Enemy commanders were confident their intelligence had been accurate and their defensive preparations were optimized for engagement. Artillery was positioned, fire plans were ready, reserves were alert. Everything enemy doctrine required for successful defensive operation. What enemy didn't know was that amphibious force would redirect in final hours before landing, heading toward different beaches that enemy had defended less comprehensively, because intelligence suggested Americans had no interest in those areas. Hour 6. Amphibious force redirected toward actual landing beaches, maintaining communications, silence preventing enemy from detecting course change. That navigation in darkness with reduced communications required exceptional seamanship and coordination. Landing craft and amphibious vehicles maintained formation discipline while executing complex maneuver, directing thousands of Marines toward beaches. Enemy wasn't prepared to defend as heavily as locations intelligence indicated were American objectives. Enemy coastal surveillance detected American force heading toward different beaches than intelligence predicted, but couldn't communicate warnings effectively because American electronic warfare was jamming enemy communications, preventing rapid reallocation of defensive resources. By time enemy recognized assault wasn't targeting expected beaches, American forces were already approaching actual landing zones. Hour 8. First landing waves hit beaches. Enemy defensive fires were present, but significantly lighter than would have been encountered at diversionary beaches that enemy had fortified heavily. Obstacles and mines existed, but at lower density than at expected landing sites. Artillery fires were less concentrated because guns had been positioned optimally for diversionary beaches requiring longer time of flight to engage actual landing zones. Enemy reserves were positioned for reinforcing diversionary beaches requiring movement to reach actual assault sector, giving Americans time to establish beachhead before enemy could concentrate overwhelming force. Initial lodgment was contested, but Marines achieved foothold faster and with fewer casualties than assaulting heavily defended diversionary beaches would have produced. Hour 12. Marines had secured beachhead and begun expansion inland. Enemy attempted counterattacks but had difficulty coordinating because defensive planning had assumed assault would occur at different location. Command posts, logistics, and fire support had been positioned for operations at diversionary beaches. Reorienting to defend against actual landing required movement and reorganization under fire. Difficult operations that reduced enemy effectiveness. American expansion from beachhead proceeded against opposition that was significant but disorganized because enemy defensive preparations had been optimized for wrong beaches. Marines exploited that disorganization, advancing inland, establishing positions that would have been impossible to achieve if landing had occurred where enemy expected. Hour 18. Beachhead was secure with follow-on forces landing and logistics flowing. Enemy defensive operations shifted from attempting to eliminate beachhead to containing American expansion. Strategic objective was achieved. Marines had established foothold, enabling subsequent operations. Casualties were substantial, but far below what assaulting heavily defended diversionary beaches would have produced. Operational assessment concluded deception operation had been decisive factor enabling assault success. Enemy had prepared comprehensive defenses, but positioned them at wrong locations because American deception convinced them to defend beaches that wouldn't be assaulted while leaving actual landing beaches less heavily defended than doctrine required for stopping amphibious assault. Now for revelation that reframes entire operation. Remember comprehensive deception operation convincing enemy Americans would land at diversionary beaches. That deception wasn't just American information operation. It was enabled by penetration of enemy intelligence networks, allowing Americans to understand what information enemy was collecting and how enemy analyzed it. American intelligence had compromised enemy signals. Intelligence collection enabling Americans to understand what emissions and communications enemy monitored. That knowledge allowed creating deception signals that enemy systems would collect and interpret as indicating landing at diversionary beaches. Additionally, American counterintelligence had identified enemy human intelligence sources, enabling controlled information flow to those sources, providing consistent intelligence supporting deception. Without understanding enemy intelligence collection capabilities and methods, Americans couldn't have created deception that enemy would believe. Compromising enemy intelligence networks was prerequisite for effective deception, enabling assault success. Think about implications for operational security and deception operations. Enemy had adequate intelligence collection capabilities, including technical systems and human sources. But those capabilities were compromised by American intelligence operations that understood how enemy collected and analyzed information. That understanding enabled creating deception that appeared credible because it aligned with how enemy intelligence worked and what enemy analysts expected to see. Future military operations must account for possibility that intelligence networks are penetrated by opponents, enabling them to conduct effective deception because they understand intelligence collection and analysis processes. Enemy had done everything doctrine required for intelligence preparation, but that preparation was defeated by opponent who understood intelligence systems well enough to feed deceptive information enemy would assess as reliable. For enemy forces, this operation revealed catastrophic vulnerability in intelligence security. Their collection systems and analytical processes had been penetrated by American intelligence, enabling comprehensive deception operation. Future enemy operations face fundamental problem. Can they trust intelligence when Americans demonstrated ability to compromise intelligence networks and conduct effective deception? That uncertainty affects operational planning, forcing enemy to consider whether intelligence might be deceptive, requiring defensive preparations that cover all possibilities rather than concentrating resources based on intelligence assessments. Such dispersed defense is less effective than concentrated defense, but necessary when intelligence might be compromised. American advantage demonstrated here was more about intelligence warfare than kinetic capabilities. Penetrating enemy intelligence enabled deception that made kinetic assault feasible against defenses that should have been prohibitive. For American military, this operation validated investments in intelligence operations targeting enemy intelligence capabilities rather than just collecting information about enemy forces. Understanding how enemy collects and analyzes intelligence enabled conducting deception that enemy assessed as credible. Future amphibious operations can consider similar approaches when intelligence penetration enables understanding enemy intelligence processes well enough to conduct effective deception. That creates operational opportunities. Doctrine says don't exist because doctrine assumes enemy intelligence is reliable. But when American intelligence can compromise enemy intelligence networks, conventional assumptions about information superiority reverse, enabling Americans to conduct operations through deception rather than overwhelming force. The broader lesson applies across all military operations. Intelligence superiority isn't just about collecting better information than opponent. It includes understanding opponent's intelligence systems well enough to conduct deception. Operations opponent cannot detect. Enemy with capable intelligence collection was defeated by Americans who penetrated intelligence networks, enabling comprehensive deception about landing beaches. That created conditions where kinetic assault against fortified coast became feasible with acceptable casualties. Future warfare will increasingly involve intelligence operations targeting opponent intelligence capabilities, because compromising enemy intelligence enables deception operations that create tactical advantages kinetic capabilities alone cannot achieve. Which factor dominated this operation? A. Superior American amphibious warfare capabilities and equipment. B. Enemy defensive weaknesses and poor preparation. C. Intelligence penetration of enemy networks, enabling comprehensive deception that convinced enemy to defend wrong beaches. The answer is C. American capabilities were necessary. Enemy defenses were adequate but positioned wrong locations. Decisive factor was intelligence operation compromising enemy intelligence systems, enabling deception that made enemy allocate defensive resources to diversionary beaches while leaving actual landing beaches less heavily defended. 12,000 Marines successfully assaulted Fortified coast because enemy defended wrong beaches based on intelligence Americans controlled through compromising enemy intelligence networks. Without that intelligence advantage enabling effective deception, assault would have faced heavily defended beaches, producing casualties that might have prevented establishing secure beachhead. Can adversaries prevent such intelligence, compromise, and deception? Not easily. Intelligence networks include technical systems, human sources, and analytical processes, all potentially vulnerable to penetration by sophisticated opponent. American intelligence capabilities for compromising opponent intelligence networks are sophisticated and persistent. Defending requires comprehensive security across all intelligence functions, from collection through analysis. Even adequate security can be defeated when opponent invests sufficient resources in penetration operations. Enemy in this operation had professional intelligence capabilities, but those capabilities were compromised, enabling American deception that achieved strategic surprise despite enemy having adequate warning time to prepare defenses. That demonstrates intelligence security is never complete when facing sophisticated opponent with determination to compromise intelligence networks, enabling operational deception. What does this mean for future amphibious operations? Deception enabled by intelligence penetration can make heavily defended coasts viable assault targets when enemy can be convinced to defend wrong beaches. But such operations require intelligence capabilities most forces don't possess, understanding enemy intelligence networks well enough to conduct credible deception. American advantage demonstrated here was exclusive capability that opponents cannot easily replicate. Future American amphibious doctrine will likely incorporate deception enabled by intelligence operations as standard approach rather than exceptional technique. But success requires maintaining intelligence advantages that enable understanding and manipulating enemy intelligence networks, advantages that must be continuously defended against opponents seeking to develop similar capabilities. This operation proved that amphibious assault remains viable in modern era, when intelligence warfare enables operational deception that conventional capabilities alone cannot achieve. 12,000 Marines assaulted Fortified coast successfully because comprehensive deception operation convinced enemy to defend wrong beaches. Deception was enabled by American intelligence penetration of enemy intelligence networks, allowing creation of false information enemy assessed as credible. 6 hours from first landing to secure beachhead, with casualties far below predictions for assaulting fortified defenses. Success demonstrates that future amphibious operations are limited less by kinetic challenges than by intelligence requirements for conducting effective deception when facing capable defenders. Intelligence warfare that compromises enemy intelligence systems creates operational opportunities. Conventional analysis says don't exist, proving that information dominance enables physical dominance when intelligence advantages are properly exploited. Subscribe to AndreyNavyReport, where military analysis meets operational reality, where 12,000 Marines prove that amphibious assault remains viable when intelligence warfare enables comprehensive deception, where largest beach assault since World War II succeeded through intelligence penetration, enabling deception rather than overwhelming kinetic superiority, where operational security means defending intelligence networks as prerequisite for reliable information when sophisticated opponents can compromise intelligence systems, conducting deception that appears credible. Every operation demonstrates how modern warfare requires intelligence dominance as foundation for kinetic success when opponents have capable forces requiring deception to create exploitable tactical advantages.